One of the most challenging times in my life was when I decided to leave my career as a TV reporter and anchor to become a stay-at-home mom. I recognize having this choice is a privilege, and I am deeply grateful for the time. Yet, it took a significant toll on me. I was deeply depressed for several years. There were many reasons why I sunk to such a low place. But now, as I look back, I see that the isolation was the most challenging part of my struggle. Hello, my name is Christine Jurisic, and this is a Retreat, Reflect, Renew monthly reflection. Isolation and the gift of listening. Isolation can look and feel different depending on your situation. You may have moved away and are geographically isolated from people who care about you. There are health challenges that can leave you physically isolated at home. I hear from a lot of people struggling with that. Or it may be that you are surrounded by many people in your life, good, loving family and friends, yet no one can relate to your pain and loss, or values and faith. You share and do not feel heard. Whatever the reason for your emotional or physical isolation, it can leave you feeling empty and alone. When I left my career, coworkers said I was lucky to be able to go. My friends thought I was blessed to be able to afford to stay home. My husband was too exhausted from his job to listen to my loneliness. Everyone is telling me how fortunate I was, and of course, I was in so many ways. So what was wrong with me for not being happy? I complained and no one understood. So I learned to stay quiet, stuff it down, and carry a lot of resentment inside. Well, this challenging time was more than 20 years ago. It was only a few years ago when I read a quote from Joan Chittister that articulated the isolation of that time perfectly. Here is her quote. "Struggle is a very private thing. It happens in the very depths of our souls. It comes with the loss of what we have thought to be of such significance that we cannot abide the thought of life without it. Other people commiserate, of course, as they watch us struggle with the pain of losing, the meaning of endings, the shock of great change, and the emptiness of the present. But they cannot really share our pain, because what we have lost, however significant to us, is not really significant to them. What we lose is ours and ours alone. Our dream, our hope, our expectations, our property, our identity, all private, all personal, all uniquely and singularly ours." End quote. Finally, when I read that, after all those years, I could name why that time in my life was so hard. I felt isolated. That was the word. It was the explanation for my suffering. I began to recognize that the biggest part of my suffering came from the fact that no one understood why I was having a hard time with the loss of a job I'd dreamt of since 5th grade. No one knew that my career was, sadly, the source of my self-worth and self-esteem. I was lost without that identity. No one understood how it was more than a career for me. It was my passion, listening to others' stories, writing and sharing information with others. It just felt woven into my DNA. Producing and putting words and pictures together, it just brought my creativity to life. So for years after leaving my job, I had a nagging sadness in the pit of my stomach, which I learned not to talk about with anyone. I'm wondering if any of this resonates with you. No one understands your questions about God, about faith, and about the church you used to attend. No one understands how challenging it is for you to transition into retirement. Or no one understands how lonely you are now that your kids are out of the house, nor how you wonder what that means for your marriage. Or no one understands why you are still grieving your loved one who has been gone for too long of a time. Perhaps you feel a constant low-level, simmering frustration buried below the surface. Maybe you feel a sharp pain that comes in and out in waves. You feel lonely in it all, and there are few people, perhaps no one, with whom you feel safe sharing. This just breaks my heart. Too many people live lonely and isolated lives. Some are isolated at home, others feel lonely in their viewpoints at a time when shaming has become a sport on social media and TV. It can feel unsafe to share. I get that. Not knowing who is safe to speak with can be a lonely and anxiety-inducing place to be, especially during this time. And many are yearning for community, yet feel dissatisfied with their church communities. More and more people feel afraid to speak their truth and engage in honest dialogue with family and friends. How can we help ourselves and each other live more connected lives? We can start by listening to ourselves and others in a new way. First, listen to yourself. If you feel isolated, give yourself time to name the pain and loss. Journal it, say it out loud to yourself, and talk to God about it. Allow time to validate what you are feeling. As Chittister says above, what we lose is ours and ours alone. Because of that, you and you alone need to give yourself permission to name your struggle, honor it, and be kind to yourself while dealing with it. This is a first step. This is the step that I wish I had taken. You do not have to wait for others to validate your feelings. That's what I was doing for way too long. First, be compassionate with yourself and honor any turmoil inside of you. And then listen to others. Listen rather than trying to advise or fix. Here's one of my favorite quotes, and this is one that we share during our Sacred Circle facilitator training. Perhaps the most important thing we ever give each other is our attention, especially if it's given from the heart. When people are talking, there's no need to do anything but receive them. Just take them in. Listen to what they're saying. Care about it. Most times, caring about it is even more important than understanding it. One of my patients told me that when she tried to tell her story, people often interrupted to tell her that they once had something just like that happen to them. Suddenly, her pain became a story about themselves. Eventually, she stopped talking to most people. It was just too lonely. And that is a quote by Rachel Naomi Remen from Kitchen Table Wisdom. To sit with that quote for a moment, has that ever happened to you? You're telling your story and people are interrupting because they want to tell you how it just happened to them in the same way and they have the way to fix it for you. What did it feel like when that happened? I've noticed that the conversations I have with people have changed over the years. They have become more sacred and more intimate as I recognize the beauty of holding another story while listening, as opposed to listening with the intention of wanting to give them advice. And I know this is easy to do. This type of exchange cultivates trust in the relationship. It deepens the connection between two people in that each side experiences more freedom to share from their authentic selves. Here's a quote from Parker Palmer, the author of A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey Toward an Undivided Life. In that book, he says, "When you speak to me about your deepest questions, you do not want to be fixed or saved. You want to be seen and heard, to have your truth acknowledged and honored. If your problem is soul deep, your soul alone knows what you need to do about it. And my presumptuous advice will only drive your soul back into the woods." End quote. As I sat in my isolation all those years ago, depressed that I had given up my passion and surrounded by people telling me how lucky I was, I had no idea there was something else in store for me. I was not in touch with my spirituality, and it never dawned on me that God could have other plans for those same gifts and passions of mine. I never in my wildest dreams saw myself where I am right now, getting to use my gifts with Retreat, Reflect, Renew, and in a much more meaningful way that speaks to my true self. The journey from honoring my feelings, recognizing my gifts, and discovering God as part of my daily life happened in a faith-sharing community. My story was held with respect and love. No one gave me a fix-it formula. In that sacred space, I felt safe to work through the feelings I needed to work through. The deep, honest listening space was what brought me out of the painful feelings of isolation. As you read this reflection, I invite you to listen to the internal reaction you are having to it. If you feel isolated, what resonates here? If you do not feel isolated, how can you reach out to others who do? We are not created to live in isolation. We are called to love one another and live interdependent lives. Holding our own suffering and holding others is not always easy, yet it is important. It is where we find the fullness of God's love and mercy. I hope you will click the subscribe button for more monthly reflections and visit us at retreatreflectrenew.org, where you can read more reflections, find out how to share them in our sacred circles on Zoom or in person, and join us for an online or in-person retreat. Retreat, Reflect, Renew, a Christ-centered retreat ministry dedicated to creating sacred space for people to grow spiritually and in community.